Nintendo, right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy.
While Nintendo's first ever handheld console, the Game Boy was released all the way back in 1989 and featured monochrome graphics and primitive sounds. A ton of its games are still absolute classics that are very much worth playing today. Nintendo had dabbled in portable game devices for years before the Game Boy, but that system's swappable carts, bite-sized entries in iconic Nintendo franchises made the Game Boy a massive hit worldwide, leading to follow-up handheld systems like the Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, DS, and 3DS, and of course, Nintendo Switch. The Game Boy's library is packed with fantastic, unique games that are still easily accessible on things like Nintendo Switch Online or modern portable handhelds like the Analog Pocket. So here are the 16 best Game Boy games to get you started. Oh, and these are just original Game Boy games. No Game Boy Color or Game Boy Advance games are here, but we'll have new videos coming your way for those next. So without further ado, here are the 16 best Game Boy games of all time.
Now you're playing with power, portable power.
Yeah, we probably could have done 8, it's Game Boy's an 8-bit system, not a 16-bit system, but then we get to tell you about twice as many games. So you know what, don't worry about it, here we go.
You really gotta get one of these.
Despite carrying the Final Fantasy name, Legend II is the second game in Square's Saga series of more systems-heavy turn-based RPGs. And while the first Final Fantasy Legend game on Game Boy mostly holds up, Legend II is where the series really started to shine, and since you don't need to play the first game to understand the story in the second, Legend II is also the perfect place to start with Final Fantasy games on Game Boy. The first two Saga/Final Fantasy Legend games are among the Game Boy's first ever RPGs, and with expanded gameplay systems, graphical improvements, and a more impactful story, Final Fantasy Legend II stands above its predecessor. The Final Fantasy franchise has obviously gone on to become one of the most successful role-playing game series in history, evolving to genres like action RPG, open world, tactical RPG, and more, but the Legend series is squarely, no pun intended, of the classic top-down turn-based RPG variety, complete with adorable chunky pixel art, charming characters, and tons of fun goofy monsters to battle. Square Enix recently ported all 3 Game Boy Final Fantasy Legend games to Switch under the name Collection of Saga Final Fantasy Legend to celebrate their 30th anniversary, so you can even give Legend 2 a shot there if you'd like, but no matter how you track it down, this tiny but mighty portable RPG is worth your time. The Game Boy's first original Donkey Kong game, regularly referred to as Donkey Kong 94 by fans, might actually be the best Donkey Kong game ever made, or at least the best Donkey Kong game where you don't actually play as Donkey Kong. Released the same year as the visually groundbreaking Donkey Kong Country for Super NES, a game that quite literally begins by knocking the old arcade Donkey Kong off of his construction girders to make way for the younger, cooler new Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong 94 instead goes in a much more reverent direction, kicking off with a recreation of the first few levels of the original arcade game before opening up to 97 brand new levels. But instead of being limited by his original 1981 Jumpman moveset, Mario moves more like a 2D version of Mario 64, doing backflips, throwing items, and not dying instantly from a short fall. As the levels progress through different themed locales, the collectibles get trickier to nab and the puzzles keep ramping up, with each world also offering up several inventive boss encounters with Donkey Kong himself, and sometimes Donkey Kong Jr. Donkey Kong 94 eventually went on to become the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series of games, which, while fun, never really managed to top the original, which is a bummer since the original never got an upgraded port or remake past its original Game Boy release, outside of some nifty additional colors and borders when players plugged it into the Super Nintendo Super Game Boy peripheral. Luckily, that's not much of a deal breaker because Donkey Kong 94 is still a near perfect first-party Nintendo game, even on the original Game Boy. Hey, remember Final Fantasy Legend II from just a few spots earlier on this list? Well, good news, it got an even better sequel on the Game Boy. Final Fantasy Legend III, known as Saga 3 in Japan, retains the series' solid turn-based RPG gameplay while incorporating a deeper and more engaging story than its predecessors. Legend 3 is a time travel story where past actions appropriately affect the present, just as present actions affect the future. In this respect, it has much in common with another excellent RPG from Square, Chrono Trigger, a game that never made its way to the Game Boy, so Legend 3 is the next best thing. Kirby's Dream Land was the first ever game to feature Nintendo's now famous pink puff, and the first ever game designed by Smash Bros. Director Masahiro Sakurai. The side-scrolling action platformer also introduces recurring character King Dedede and the whimsical world of Dreamland, as well as the staple abilities Kirby possesses to this day, self-inflating in order to fly and swallowing enemies, though he can't copy their abilities, instead he spits them out as star-shaped projectiles here. It also introduces that large tree that Kirby has continued to feud with for decades for reasons we still can't explain. The bite-sized game can easily be completed in under an hour, making it a fun and breezy platformer to play and replay in a single sitting. Interestingly enough though, Kirby is a big fluffy white marshmallow color on the box art and obviously colorless in the actual Game Boy screen, although Masahiro Sakurai always intended Kirby to be a big pink puff, just like players know him today. Why he appears this way on the box art is a mystery, but hey, it just kind of adds to the charm and quirkiness of Kirby's first adventure. In the 90s, developer Rare was making some of the most graphically impressive games on the Super Nintendo, notably the Donkey Kong Country series and the arcade fighting game Killer Instinct. These games didn't exactly translate perfectly to the much less powerful Game Boy, but they were still able to pull off some really impressive portable ports regardless. Donkey Kong Land II is a remixed handheld version of the beloved SNES platformer Donkey Kong Country 2. Now, the Game Boy version features the same playable characters, Diddy and Dixie Kong, and premise, rescue Donkey Kong from Captain K. Rool, though the level and puzzle design are altered to adapt to the less powerful hardware. It's a great platformer in its own right, and like Donkey Kong Land before it, was also released on a sweet banana yellow colored cartridge. What's cool about the Donkey Kong Land games on Game Boy is that the level design in them feels unique and different enough from their SNES counterparts, making them great counterpart games in their own right instead of just inferior versions like so many other classic console games that have been ported to handheld devices over the years. Compared to its much simpler but still great predecessor, Kirby's Dream Land II is much more of a Kirby game as we know them today. The sequel allows players to mix and match powers thanks to Kirby's signature ability absorbing power. But the most significant addition is Kirby's new ability altering animal friends, which he can use to ride, fly, and swim through a wide variety of brilliantly designed levels. Kirby's Dream Land 2 is also roughly 3 times longer than the original, making it a much deeper but still easily approachable experience. Dream Land 2 very much laid the groundwork for the future of Kirby games being equal parts clever and adorable, and yes, you get to beat up that huge stupid tree again. Months before the debut of the Game Boy Color, Nintendo released Wario Land II for its original handheld system. Wario is a much hardier, heavier playable character than Mario is, complete with his own moveset led by a powerful charge attack which enables much more aggressive gameplay. Oh, and he's also immortal, meaning Wario cannot die in Wario Land 2. Over the course of its 50+ levels, Wario Land 2 impresses with great variety in its boss battles and a surprisingly complex web of hidden exits, secret paths, and alternate endings, making it one of the deeper platformers on the Game Boy, despite Wario's, shallow personality. Hey, do you want even more Wario on the Game Boy? Well, we got you covered. Wario's first solo platformer is also the third Super Mario Land game on Game Boy, despite being a very different kind of game. It's also called Wario Land Super Mario Land 3, making it one of the first examples of Nintendo using occasionally confusing naming conventions for their Mario sequels, a practice they perfected on the Game Boy Advance with Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3, and yes, that's a real title. Anyway, Wario Land is also an early example of Nintendo's inclination towards the experimental. Wario Land Super Mario Land 3 ditches the company's well-known plumber mascot in favor of an unproven, previously unplayable menace. Wario Land broadly retained the platforming structure of Super Mario Land, though Mario's boisterous counterpart replaces mushrooms with garlic and introduces new gameplay wrinkles, including more avenues for exploration and a new set of power-inducing hats, like the bull cap, which lets him ground pound and stick to ceilings, the dragon cap, which lets him shoot a stream of fire, and the jet cap that lets him glide through the air. One of two Game Boy launch titles on this list, Super Mario Land was Nintendo's first ever Mario platformer designed and released exclusively for a handheld system. Super Mario Land retains the basic premise of its 2D platforming console counterpart, Super Mario Bros., though as necessitated by the Game Boy's 2.6-inch screen, all gameplay and design elements are drastically shrunk. The result is an oddball version of a Mario game, complete with exploding Koopa shells, rubber-like Super Balls instead of fireballs, and two forced scrolling shooting levels in the vein of Konami's Gradius series. The result is a delightfully weird, bite-sized Mario game that still feels special today, thanks to a bunch of one-of-a-kind artistic and gameplay decisions, along with an incredibly catchy soundtrack. It also introduced Princess Daisy, who briefly supplanted Peach as Mario's damsel in distress, so if you love playing as Daisy in modern Mario Kart or Mario Party games today, you have Super Mario Land to thank. From plumber to kart driver to basketball player, Mario has had a ton of different jobs over the years, but probably the most surprising out of character for him is doctor. Mostly because plumbers who put their hands in toilets and surgeons who put their hands in people are almost never the same guy. Dr. Mario tasks players with destroying viruses by matching the colors of on-screen virus sprites with the colors of falling pill capsules, or on the monochrome Game Boy screen, black, white, and gray shades of virus sprites, while it's missing the red, yellow, and blue viruses and retaliatory pill colors seen in the NES version. The familiar and addictive gameplay loop still works perfectly on the tiny Game Boy screen. Dr. Mario is one of the most beloved and memorable Game Boy titles and one of the best puzzle games out there, and yeah, that music will definitely be stuck in your head for days to come. The best of Nintendo's Mario/Wario Game Boy platformers is Super Mario Land II: 6 Golden Coins. This sequel is a massive improvement on the original with more fluid gameplay, better levels with secret exits, and notably bigger, more detailed sprites. Mario Land 2 also adds the ability to backtrack, the original screen only moved right, a Super Mario World-like overworld, and 6 cleverly designed zones that players can tackle in the order of their choosing. Like the original Super Mario Land, the platforming may feel a bit floaty compared to the NES and SNES Mario games, but once it clicks, you'll be clearing levels in no time. 6 Golden Coins ditches the original Mario Land's bouncy Super Ball flower in favor of the more familiar and satisfying Fire Flower, but it also introduces a bunch of its own power-up suits, like Bunny Mario, who can jump higher and glide through the air. Wario, who became the series' playable character in Super Mario Land 3, makes his debut here as the game's main villain, living in a huge, creepy castle. Despite being so fun, Mario Land 2 never got the remake treatment from Nintendo, but luckily, playing it on the Game Boy still feels fresh and great today. Tetris may come in as our 5th ranked Game Boy game, but it's probably the handheld console's most important. In North America and Europe, Tetris was synonymous with Game Boy, as it was included as a pack-in game for the system's launch in 1989. The timeless puzzler is a perfect fit for on-the-go gameplay and is credited with helping boost and maintain Game Boy sales for Nintendo. Tetris is ubiquitous as an iconic puzzle game franchise today, but when it first launched, seeing adult non-gamer businessmen on airplanes hunched over the tiny Game Boy screen addicted to Tetris was a sight never before seen. The Game Boy version features 3 modes: A-Type, which is endless mode, B-Type, which challenges players with a 25-line speed-based mode, and 2-player, a head-to-head multiplayer mode that utilizes the GameLink cable Game Boy accessory. Tetris sold 35 million units on the Game Boy, making it the best-selling single Game Boy release ever, and the second best-selling overall, behind the collective sales total of Pokémon Red, Green, Blue, and Yellow. A ton of different versions of Tetris have been released on nearly every platform since, but there's just something so special about playing it where it really made a name for itself on the Game Boy. Metroid II: Return of Samus is the franchise's second ever game and its first on handheld, encapsulating much of what makes the series so special. It's a superpowered solo quest with an eerie sense of isolation, amplified by cramped, purposefully obtuse level design. Return of Samus introduced several lasting Metroid weapons and abilities, including the Plasma Beam, Space Jump, and the all-important Spider Ball. Its staying power extends to its narrative as well, introducing Baby Metroid and setting up the events of its extraordinary SNES sequel, Super Metroid. Metroid 2 was remade for 3DS in 2017 as Metroid Samus Returns, which added a ton of quality of life features and more, but playing it on the Game Boy feels tougher and creepier, even if you might need to Google a map to follow along while you play. The games that began the Pokémon craze almost 3 decades ago, Pokémon Red and Blue quickly became must-play games on Game Boy. These collecting and battling games introduced the rich world of creatures, characters, and companionship Pokémon remains known for to this day, creating generations of obsessive fans still trying to catch them all. Players embarked on a journey to become Kanto's champion, collecting, training, and battling Pokémon to defeat the region's 8 gym leaders and Elite Four. The humble Game Boy games, inspired by creator Satoshi Tajiri's childhood love of insect collecting, spawned the highest-grossing media franchise ever, with over 100 sequels and spin-offs, an internationally popular trading card game, dozens of successful movies and TV series, and endless merch. But hey, it all started on the humble, little original Game Boy. Zelda debuted on a handheld console for the first time with the franchise's 4th game, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, a Zelda adventure unlike any other. The game begins with Link shipwrecked and stranded on Koholint Island, away from the familiarity of Hyrule. As Link, the player is tasked with dungeon crawling about the island to collect 8 instruments before ascending to the top of a mountain to wake the divine Windfish, who sleeps within a giant egg. Like the Zelda games before, the gameplay of Link's Awakening balances combat, exploration, and puzzle solving. Now, it's a solid Zelda game by those traditional measures, elevated by a strange, secret-filled, surrealist story worthy of its Twin Peaks inspiration. That strange mix could have been lost to time, but a full and charming remake of Link's Awakening was released for Switch in 2019, keeping one of Nintendo's best ever games alive for modern audiences. To this day, Link's Awakening has one of the most surreal and humorous Zelda game stories and settings. Playing a full-size Zelda game, complete with dungeons, side quests, and a big overworld on the tiny Game Boy screen way back in 1993 was and still is an incredible experience. And finally, to a subset of owners, Game Boy was primarily a Pokémon machine, and Pokémon Yellow was the console's definitive Pokémon experience. The enhanced version of Game Freak's first ever Pokémon adventure most notably replaced the player's starter Pokémon with a companion named Pikachu that followed you around in the overworld. Game Freak made other changes in Yellow to align with the first season of the Pokémon anime. Pokemon's first generation of games, Yellow, Red, Blue, and Green, remain its best-selling with an estimated 47 million copies sold, placing it high on the list of the best-selling video games of all time. Approaching 3 decades later, the franchise is still thriving today. The latest games, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, are among Nintendo's fastest-selling games ever, and the game franchise collective sales total is nearing 500 million copies.
Nintendo, right in the palm of your hand.
So there you have it, our 16 favorite games on the original Game Boy. These classics represent just a small fraction of the outstanding games on Nintendo's first dedicated handheld system. We definitely missed a few, so be sure to hop into the comments and sound off with your personal favorite Game Boy games. In the meantime, for all things video games, even the ones that don't even have colors in them, stick with IGN.